You've actually created an entire global career out of an obsession.
I'm obsessed about communication. I began to be fascinated by the fact that someone can use their words and another person like myself could get goosebumps from those words. How does that happen?
This is a craft, and like any craft, to get to mastery, it takes time and commitment and conviction.
Great communicators, great speakers, they're made. Absolutely, they are made. They are not born.
I am here to elevate the job you do by giving you specific tactical tools and techniques that will help you sharpen the most critical leadership skill that you can build today.
There's a need out there for people to communicate more effectively. Simple communication, being able to translate it to different audiences, is critical if you want to get buy-in for your project. And that's how I started writing books. People who have great ideas, world-changing ideas, they're the ones who need that tool. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to be heard through the noise, and your voice deserves to be heard. But not if you can't articulate your idea in a way that grabs people's attention and really motivates them and inspires them.
Carmine Gallo, welcome to our world.
Jacqueline, thank you. It's really nice to be able to talk to you and to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Carmine, we do have your official bios. We're doing all the right things. Your official bios are going to the show notes with this conversation. We can actually Google you and see them really fast. And we feel like we've got to know you through your books, especially on the other side of the world from you. What I'd love to know, though, is, in your own words, who is Carmine Gallo and how did you get here?
I'm passionate, I would say obsessed about communication. And that goes back to high school, I think, where I started reading books on history books on Winston Churchill and a lot of famous speakers. And then in college, I began to gravitate toward public speaking and speeches, and I loved listening to great speeches. Whether it was presidential speeches or even corporate speeches back then.
Yeah.
And I began to be fascinated by the fact that someone can use their words and another person like myself could get goosebumps from those words. How does that happen? Yeah, how does that? So I really just became obsessed with communication and writing and translating ideas into words, just in all of those different facets. And I've just never really let go. I've just been tremendously, I use the word obsessed because I am. There isn't one day that goes by where I don't find something related to communication that I would like to improve or something that impresses me. So it really is my passion.
I love the fact that you've actually created an entire career, global career, out of an obsession. And I think, I have a son who works in politics and is in research, and he says, Mum, I get paid to nerd out on this stuff, right?
Yes.
So it kind of sounds like the same sort of thing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. You get paid to follow not only your passion, but what the type of thing that you would probably be learning or doing anyway, whether or not you got paid for it. So it's a nice combination.
Absolutely. So when I actually, because I have inhaled all of your books over time, and when I actually look through those, there is one time we give a glimpse where you were a lawyer, you gave that up to go to broadcast journalism, then you ended up, in this space that you're in now. How did you actually, because lawyers can be great storytellers, but the majority of them aren't. Broadcast journalists are great narrators, and I've seen a lot of broadcast journalists not transition to storytelling very well as speakers. What is it that you think actually pulled you through all of those, and what did you take from those particular facets into what you do now?
Well, just one clarification. I almost went into law. But
you started before you got there.
At the last minute, but that's okay because I do talk about that a lot. I studied law, and last minute I decided, I don't think this is for me. Simply because when you study law, and I studied it in college, and I was prepared to go in that direction, you study like these grand cases. You study the big cases, the milestones, and then you begin to realize that everyday law is a lot of paperwork. It's not like, you're not a big
It's quite
trial
tedious,
attorney or
isn't
in
it?
front of the U.S. Supreme Court or anything. And then I began to realize, obviously, I began to realize that the way lawyers communicate too is very convoluted because they're using Latin-based words instead of just plain English. Right? So that experience was really important for me to gravitate toward what I would eventually end up doing and what my passion would be, which is communication.
Yeah, absolutely. What prompted the shift? Because you actually speak in one of your books about actually shifting into broadcast journalism and wondering whether your father was going to be okay. But what prompted that shift into broadcast journalism? Why did you choose that?
What am I going to do? Let's see. I love words. I love ideas. I love current events. Don't want to be a lawyer. What am I going to do next? Speech writing, maybe? Let's give that a go. But I'd rather be the person giving the speech, not the one just writing the speech. I'd want to be the face of the speech too, because they're my ideas and I want to share them. So that's not going to work out. Well, I love current events. How about journalism? So I got a master's degree at Northwestern. I went to UCLA for an undergrad, went to Northwestern, got a master's degree in broadcast journalism, and spent the next 15 years of my career in broadcasting. So probably spent a little longer than I would have, I think, looking back, but that it taught me how to write, how to speak, how to deliver, but it also taught me the gap, the problem that needs to be solved, which is very few people are good on television. Very few people are good spokespeople for any topic, which is why when I worked at CNN and some other platforms, we would often go back to the same spokespeople. We went back to the same people time and time again every week. When I worked briefly in New York City, I would say, but there are 1,000 economists. There are 1,000 analysts. Why do we only go back to the same 5 or 6? Oh, because they're the people who can best translate complex ideas into simple sound bites and quotes that anyone can easily grasp. Light bulb goes off. Light bulb, Carmine, there's a need out there for people to communicate more effectively. So that's how I got into writing and coaching.
And coaching. And
Yeah.
I think that's actually fascinating because we see all the time, like, in the expert field, or even, as you know, with people who are CEOs and founders of big businesses, we see all the time that they're not quite cutting through. They're not quite getting that position. It's always, I can't break through that inner circle of 5 or 6 that the media always go to, or that the big clients always go to. My thing is, it's never the market, it's always you, right? And usually it's your communication. So that's actually what you're articulating there, is you really saw that people don't invest enough in actually that one core skill that will change the game for them. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. And I think that because I like putting pieces of the rhetorical puzzle together, I'm very good at, I've just realized this over many years. What I am good at is analyzing. Why is this particular TED Talk very good? Why is this particular speech well received? Why is this presentation so effective? And that's how I started writing books. One of my first most popular books was on Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs was considered, and I still consider him, one of the best business storytellers of all time. What exactly did he do? And so I put on my creative hat and also my journalist hat, and I began interviewing people who knew him or people who worked directly with him to create and design his slides that he would use for presentations. And I approached the same with TED Talks too. So I like the whole idea of applying my passion for communication and my experience and passion for investigative journalism, figuring things out and explaining it to people.
I think also too, you just actually earlier you said about there was a lack of people who could distill complex ideas into something simple. Is that actually the role that you've taken on? You're looking at these fascinating speeches and these incredible, powerful formats. Do you think that's actually the role that you've taken on in your own work?
I feel like my work is best suited for people who have big ideas, complex ideas, because that's hard. Creating a pitch or a presentation around a solution to big problems, really complex problems that don't always fit into 140 characters online, that's hard. That's hard. And that's in California where I live. So I've been able to work with people who represent or have companies around cloud computing, technology, healthcare, farming, where your food is coming from, and certainly energy. What are the problems with energy? What are the solutions? Well, the solutions are incredibly complex, very hard for people to articulate. So I enjoy that. I enjoy taking complex ideas and getting my hands dirty into the real messy middle ground where I think most good solutions lie, not on the polar extremes, but in the middle. But how do you articulate that, and how are you heard through the noise? That's hard. If persuasion was easy, we would all be able to persuade anybody of anything. No, persuasion is very difficult. So I think there's always new tactics, new tools to learn, and to pull from in a rhetorical tool belt. I like to give people tactics. Let's see what works, what doesn't, and we'll adjust.
Amazing. You actually rattled off a whole heap of industries there that are by nature very technical and very complex. Now, the majority of people in those spaces, and I've worked in a lot of those spaces, the majority of people in those spaces will tell you this is technical and logical. You have some really great examples of where story changed the game. Why is storytelling important in complexity and also very technical spaces?
Yeah, we have to get away from this idea that the spaces that are too technical don't lend themselves to story or effective communication. It's more important in highly technical and complex areas that you, as a person with those ideas, if you want to get buy-in for those ideas, then it's more imperative than any other field that you communicate succinctly, concisely, and in a simple way that anybody can understand. So, for example, let me give you one quick example. I live near a government lab that does a lot of advanced scientific research. So I was speaking to one of the scientists who is a female named Annie Kreitcher. You can look up our video. It's online. And I had an interview with her. She was named to Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People because of the kind of work she's doing, which is in an area called nuclear fusion, replicating the sun's power on Earth to create milestones and the foundation for renewable energy. So I got a tour of the lab. I got a tour of the lasers they're using. It became global news when this happened. So I talked to one of the premier scientists on the program, Annie Kreitcher, and I asked her, explain what you do to a non-expert. And she explained it pretty much like I just told you. Well, it's kind of the holy grail of science. She used the holy grail of science. So she's using like a metaphor. And then she's taking an example that I would know. So Carmine, sort of like taking the sun's energy, trying to create that energy in a controlled setting so that hopefully it'll pave a path for a renewable energy future. Oh, okay. I kind of get that. I'm okay with that. And then I decided, before I let you go, Annie, would you give me the same definition or description, but to another PhD or another scientist in nuclear physics? Without missing a beat, she completely translated it. And it was, I always have to read it when I deliver it to audiences because it has to do with isotopes and deuterium temperatures, and absolutely so convoluted that the average person would have no clue, no concept as to what she's talking about. Completely different language. But she could do it seamlessly. And I asked her, there's something going on here. How can you go from speaking to one audience, non-experts, to speaking to your peers very seamlessly from one second to another? And she said, oh, we have to train for this. We train for it. Effective communication, simple communication, being able to translate it to different audiences is critical if you want to get buy-in for your project. Of course, it does not just for a scientific government lab, but for any project. If you want to get buy-in, you have to be able to translate what you do to different audiences. And if you don't have that skill, that can hold you back in so many ways in so many careers.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the most powerful example that comes to mind of actually shifting gears, going from that really technical speech to that very story-based translation simplification? What's something that really springs to mind for you in that space where somebody really nailed that transition?
Well, certainly the one I just gave you was a fantastic example. But I love listening to scientists, especially. Who can communicate in ways that are simple. But I watch a lot of corporate and I watch a lot of business people as well, whether it's Apple. That's why Steve Jobs was considered brilliant at what he did, because he knew how to translate highly technical material for his customers and consumers, people who did not care about how many gigabytes are inside a particular machine or product. Okay, like remember the first iPod was 5 gigs of storage. He realized not one person cares that is 5 gigs of storage, but they do care that it was the equivalent of carrying 1,000 songs in your pocket. Oh, well, that's an interesting one. Well, I want that. I want that product. Well, why don't you want a product that has 5 gigs of storage? Oh, that's not interesting. But 1,000 songs in my pocket? I love it. That's great. So Steve Jobs was brilliant at that. So he was so far advanced for his time. And you know what, Jacqueline? None of his slides, this comes back to some of our, I know we'll be getting into this, like TED-style presentations. None of Steve Jobs' slides ever had bullet points. So he was way ahead. He was way ahead of his time, because to this day, most presentations are overloaded with text and bullet points. His was graphics and imagery and animation. He wanted to build an emotional connection with you, not to put you to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I also think that because he did that at the time he did it, it was a real cut-through moment because people weren't used to that visceral response to a presentation and things like that. And we are definitely going to double back to that because I really have a love-hate relationship with PowerPoint. I think when it's all your slides, I think when they're used well, they add to the experience. But I think 95% of the population
I agree with you.
Dot point and bullet point.
I was just going to add, but they are rarely used well to this day.
Yeah.
And I have a theory for that too, but we could talk about it later.
Oh, I'm going to bookmark that one to come back to. We're talking about storytelling, and you talk, one of the things that bubbles up in a couple of your different books is the 4 questions that you walk people through to get them from that logic to actually getting to the heart of the story, like what actually makes their hearts sing. Can you actually just share those questions with the audience? Because I love that process.
Yes, they are a group of questions that I have started to use to get to the core of who you are and what your message is. And they start broadly, and frankly, they're actually just a way of looking at questions through my own internal struggle of how do I get the best stories out of people. So this is how they evolved, okay? So the first question was almost always, when I'm working with people, tell me what you do. Well, the answers to that aren't very exciting because when you ask people, tell me what you do, you get titles like I'm a healthcare director. Okay, so you get titles and just real basic things, but you kind of need those questions. You need that. Okay, so I sort of need that before I can really help a speaker. Okay, what do you do? Tell me more about what you do. Tell me more about the company. What does it do? But it's not very interesting. So then I started asking, well, what are you passionate about? Right? That seems like a common question. Instead of just what you do, what are you passionate about? And that's an okay question because then people will say, well, I'm passionate about healthcare and giving people a better experience customer care, things like, okay, all right, that's not bad. It's a little more interesting than what do you do, which almost always goes to
Yeah.
a resume. So
Yeah,
I started
the
adding
CV check.
exactly. So I started asking another question. Well, why do you do what you do? Oh, well, Carmine, healthcare is very important. And did you know that 22% of people 55 and over don't have access to this type of healthcare? Oh, okay. All right. So now I'm starting to dive a little bit more. I'm starting to get a little bit more from you as a speaker, but there's still no emotion. There's no stories. So then I added a final question. This comes back to Steve Jobs, learned it from Steve Jobs and Apple. Steve Jobs paused at the end of a major presentation and he said, and I think it was sort of off the cuff, I don't think it was planned, and he said, it's the intersection between technology and liberal arts that makes my heart sing. And I thought, bingo, light bulb moment. That's the question. Let me turn that into a question. So now I go through kind of a process. What do you do? What are you passionate about? Why do you do what you do? But then I always end with, okay, now think about this one. What makes your heart sing? And more often than not, people will pause and they won't give me their resume. They won't give me their title. They won't go into facts, figures, and data. They'll say, what makes my heart sing? Well, when I was younger, my mom went through a health scare, and she didn't have therapy available to her back then. I began to realize maybe this is the journey I should make in my life. Oh, okay. Now we're getting into story. Now we're getting into the core of who you are, which I think that's what a good origin story does. A good backstory will reflect who you are and why you do what you do and what your values are. So again, we're looking at that puzzle. How do we get people to be the best speakers they can? It's not always easy. We have to come up with structures and methods and tools and tactics to get the best presentation from people.
Yeah, it always surprised me. I did a number of years working with gold medal Olympians here in Australia through the Australian Institute of Sport. And the whole idea was I was brought in as the storytelling skills mentor because they realized that they needed to get the gold medal Olympians to share stories of their experience for the younger generation coming through, right? So what could they expect? And some real realities about the stress and the pressures and the things like that and those moments of truth. And it always fascinated me that when I sat down with them, the first response, and some of these are people that in Australia, like they're our household names, right? And they're incredible Olympians and they've done not just one or two gold medals, but multiple, and they're in service to others. They're now mentoring the next generation of Olympians. Mm-hmm. And the first response to my question was, what stories would you like to start with? Was always, I don't have any stories to share. And it used to just, the first few times it happened, I just thought, oh, this is just the people I've got. I didn't really think it was a thing, but then it became consistent and I had to get very clever at guiding them into finding their stories. I'd love to know from you, when someone says, I don't really have a story to tell, how do you get them to gather up their stories?
Oh, everyone has look, when I was in journalism, day one or the first week, not journalism, but when I went to journalism class, I remember going out on a project, coming back, and that's what I said. I told the instructor, there's no story there. And that was the last time that happened. Because he was very angry.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Very angry, raised his voice and said, Gallo, there's always a story. Yeah, he was right? There's always a story. And so, but people are natural storytellers. That's okay. That's what we do because we enjoy it so much. Not everybody is a novelist. Not everybody's a screenwriter. They're not looking at their lives through the lens of story. And yet, this is important. We should talk about this. Storytelling is who we are. We are storytellers. It's in our DNA. We now know that. In the lab, they are finding things that the way our brain is structured, the way we communicate with each other, they're finding things that we've known intuitively for hundreds of thousands of years, which is why our cave-dwelling ancestors would sit around a campfire and tell stories. And stories sparked their imagination, and stories, that's how we became explorers and curious people. And that's how we learned things. That's how our species became so dominant, was through stories. We are all storytellers. I just don't think that when you're in a professional setting, you don't see yourself as a storyteller. But what I tell people is when you start seeing yourself as a storyteller, the presentation that your audience sees will change significantly, much more impactful.
What is it that changes about the presentation? Once somebody steps into seeing themselves as a storyteller, what is it that changes that the audience feels?
Well, let's talk about TED Talks if we can. One of the
absolutely.
rules of the TED Commandments, as they say, is thou shalt tell a story. And I think they have to put that down as a rule because exactly what we're talking about here, people don't see themselves as storytellers. So it's all about the information that I want to share. I have facts, figures, arguments, evidence, data, and I can't wait to give you all of my analysis. But what the gap and what they need to realize is that most people, and most of the time, behavioral psychologists have figured this out, we are not necessarily motivated just by facts and figures in an important part of a presentation, but facts alone, information alone is not enough. We have to be connected with each other on an emotional level. Well, guess what? There is a tactic, there is a tool that we have, that we've used for hundreds of thousands of years to connect with people: story. So why aren't we using stories in our public presentations? That's why I think the TED organizers have had to say, we want to hear a story. Because if you don't say that, if you don't make that more of a rule, a guideline, then people won't tell you a story.
I think that's fascinating that it actually has to be a TED commandment. It's not just a given that it's about the stories. One of the things that I find really interesting with this, though, is, I talk about, you put in is storytelling important in communication into Google. You've got 1.3 billion responses in 0.3 of a second. We actually all know storytelling is important at a macro level, right? Yeah. You have a flourishing practice with what you do and the thought leadership that you do. Why is it that people like you need to exist? Like, if we know storytelling is important at this logical level, why are so many stories told badly?
Because, again, I don't think that this is what people have fires to put out every day. They're busy with doing what they do best. But like I said, they're not novelists. They haven't. Most people have not taken a creative writing course. Most people don't analyze film. Yeah, most people don't do screen. They don't take a screenwriting course. And if they did, it would be because they're screenwriters. Not all screenwriters are good presenters. There's a blending of these worlds that I just think is, I don't judge people at all for this. I just think that they are busy doing whatever it is that they do to be experts in their field. And they don't think about themselves in this way. And that's okay. That's what I do. That's why I'm trying to learn things from different people who are either in the creative arts or who are highly technical, but have that skill of storytelling. So more often than not, there are many people who I interview or who I've talked to, experts and business leaders of all types, who often are the ones who bring up storytelling to me. That's why I've written books just on storytelling. And this is an interesting anecdote. I was speaking to a very high-profile venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. This was many years ago. And I made the mistake of saying, well, I teach the soft skills, like storytelling. Okay? Mistake. I've never done this since. Boy, he really let me have it. He said, oh, well, hold on, Carmine. You call it a soft skill. I call it fundamental, because if you can't tell me, if you're an entrepreneur and you can't tell me a story, and you can't convince me to come along on this journey, then I'm not investing in you. That's it. So you can have a great idea, but you're not going to get funded.
Yeah. And that's, and for everyone listening, the people in my world know that I say those sorts of things all the time. I'm a pitch coach in the startup and innovation space. And to hear you actually confirm that the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, who are like the gurus and the gods of this space on the world, are actually saying, if you don't have a story, I'm not investing, full stop.
Yeah.
I just want everyone listening to really hear that. In your opinion, Carmine, is everyone capable of becoming a powerful storyteller?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I'm not just saying that as a coach. It's because I've not only seen it anecdotally, but I've read about this. There isn't one person who we admire, just on a global level. There isn't anyone who we really admire as a communicator, whether it's current or historical, who hasn't worked at it. And I go back to I did a lot of research on Martin Luther King when I was writing some of my books. And Martin Luther King worked at it.
Very hard.
Very hard. So by the time he gave the I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he had already given thousands of speeches because he was a preacher. And so he was constantly working on the craft. Great communicators, great speakers they're made. Absolutely, they are made. They are not born. There isn't one interesting speaker who I've interviewed or someone who's considered very charismatic who didn't put in a lot of work. Steve Jobs especially, when I wrote the book on Steve Jobs, I talked to people who knew him when he first started Apple. He was an introvert. He was very nervous. He had panic attacks. He was not comfortable on stage. He would hold the lectern. There's an old video of him, 1984, like gripping the lectern. He was pure stage fright. 20 years later, he was Mr. Charisma, right, on stage. So I think whoever it is that you look at, I bet you that somewhere in their past, they had to work at the craft. So anyone can work at the craft, but not everybody's dedicated enough to do that. And it's not that easy. Yeah. That's why they need some guidance and some coaching.